Hello, everyone. Sorry it took me so long to get back. I want to get right into business. I showed you the ritual in the stars, and then I was introduced to this concept of the ritual of submergence. I don't know these areas of the country very well, and I thought just because I didn't know didn't mean you didn't know. This was my thinking, and adding to this is the difficulty in learning how deep you want to go when you find new information. Now, I want there to be full disclosure here. I received no feedback on any platform calling me out on the Swan Association with Indian religious practices. I mean, I never heard of it, but that didn't mean you never did, or anyone else in the audience. And I never got anything back, either yay or nay. But this is calling myself out. I had to take a step back. With work, pressure, and home schedule, and the timetable of this ritual, I gave you fluff, and that's not happening again. My channel description: exposure belief leads to faith. Faith leads to question, then doubt, then critique. Critique leads to stress, and if pass, claim it, and then you grow or expose it. This is a 9-step process. I messed up. I only got to faith because there was just so much information. First order of business is the ritual of submergence. The way 432 The Drop Radio presented it, I thought they were part of an indigenous tribal assault. Instead, they were a series of black communities submerged by dams, and only black communities. Let's see the official.
Hello, once again, this is Antonio, and I'm coming at you with another exciting video. Now, have you ever noticed in America, if you ever come to America to visit, or if you're living in America, that they have, like, for example, Little Italy, you got Chinatown, Koreatown, you even have like Germantown, Russian town, but you never seem to notice or see any type of Black America town. Um, in America, I consider myself a Black American or just plain American at that. I don't delineate because I'm proud of my country, but we sometimes got to pull back the scab and really understand some of um, the traumas and adversities that a lot of Black people experience. And what we are speaking about is 7 different towns, 7 different times. Black communities were destroyed, either flooded or they had to be given up by eminent domain. And some of these places are now either airports, lakes, huge tourist attractions, and it's just a bad thing when we don't even have a place where we got a designated place for, like I said, a Black American town. We don't have that. That doesn't exist in America. And people that come here, they don't understand the culture. All they see is some of the crimes that some of the Black Americans created, or other other groups of people create, because we are not the only people that commit crime here in America. So without further ado, I'm going to play 7 different times, 7 different videos on how towns, places were Black towns, and they were taken over. So we did have Black American areas, but they were destroyed. So without further ado, let's go ahead and share my screen.
So I'm going to fast forward to the 3 flooded ones. Here is Oscarville.
But you may know it as it exists now because it's Lake Lanier. Lake Lanier has a dark history. That's one of the most deadliest lakes in Georgia. right? So let's go to play this video.
Taking a closer look at an all-black town in Georgia called Oscarville.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about this on social media for the last few years, and if you haven't heard of it, it's probably because it no longer exists. It's buried under Lake Lanier. 11 Alive's Latasha Gibbons has more.
When we started working on this story, we set out to track down descendants of Oscarville. Weeks later, we found a family who could trace back their roots 4 generations. They shared with us stories that were handed down about what the all-black town was like, including the night that led to its destruction. It was set on fire by night riders after they say a white woman was raped. Then later, it was covered by the body of water we now know as Lake Lanier. May Crow is buried here at this Gainesville cemetery, but the trail of destruction following her death stretches into the land surrounding Forsyth County, buried beneath these waves of Lake Lanier, where in 1912 nearly every black resident was forced out. That includes people living in an old black town called Oscarville. The community was formed in the late 1800s during the Reconstruction era.
There was a very strong community feeling among the blacks. About 300 kids, children, that went to some of the schools that were the black schools, and it was closely connected to the churches.
Georgia history teacher Lisa Crosby says Oscarville was a thriving black community, full of carpenters, blacksmiths, and bricklayers, but farming was the top trade.
So they really had kind of a miraculous farming growth here while the rest of the state was really struggling.
But then residents were abruptly forced off their land.
So the flashpoint, I think, is 1912.
This takes us back to the death of May Crow. The 19-year-old white woman was found dead in the woods near Oscarville, presumably after being raped.
Typically, the answer to white girls being raped was go to the black community and just start blaming people.
By nightfall, terror began to reign over Oscarville.
And the night turned deadly. You know, they were waking up by fires outside, fire bombs thrown in the church.
Filmmaker Bob Mackey recaptures those horrific nights in an upcoming television series.
Anytime anything happened, guess where everyone would go? To the church. Well, they attacked the church. People were hung, lynched.
Mackey's series features stories of direct descendants like George Rucker, who can trace his family back 4 generations to Oscarville. He tells the story of his great-grandfather, Bert Oliver, and the entire family being forced off their land.
Night riders came through.
Rucker says his great-grandfather married his second wife, Beulah, and they built this school that still stands in Gainesville today. By the late 1950s, the Beaufort Dam was built and Lake Lanier was formed, covering up Oscarville and swallowing most of its history. Many believe Lake Lanier is haunted because of the high number of drownings. We spoke to officials who tell us because there is an entire town that includes structures and even forest areas with trees that are 60 feet tall, it makes it more difficult to navigate through, and someone can easily become trapped in debris, leading them to drowning.
All right, so let's go to our next video.
I'm going to fast forward to another Lake Martin.
This is St. Martin, all right? The forgotten community of Cowaglia. All right, let's carry on.
But if you ask anyone down south, it is also one of the most popular destinations in the Cotton State. So, whether you're into adventures and heart-pumping activities, or looking for hiking trails and stunning viewpoints, or trying to enjoy the slow tempo of the South, spiced with a bit of comfort food, Lake Martin is a place for everyone to enjoy. One of Lake Martin's landmarks is the famous Kalijah restaurant, sitting far out into the lake on a peninsula. One can recognize it by a tall wooden statue of an Indian standing in the front of the restaurant. It's the very same wooden Indian from Hank Williams' song, Kalijah, the story of a wooden Indian who fell in love with an Indian maid. However, not many people know that some 80 feet beneath the waterline lies the town of Kalijah. Even though one of the rare prosperous majority black communities in the South at the turn of the 20th century, Kalijah is now nothing more than another chapter in the less-known history of the United States. A slave named John, who worked on a plantation in Kalijah Creek, had become a free man after the war ended. Free, but all alone, John decided to build his life from scratch. He took the surname of his master, James Benson, and went to look for his lost sister. During the age of slavery, it was a common thing to separate family members. John's sister was separated from him when they were still children and was sold to a landlord in Florida. John undertook a risky endeavor, wandering the lands of Florida, but was finally rejoined with his sister. Together, the two of them returned to Alabama, where John found a job in Cahaba Field coal mines in Shelby County. Mining coal was a difficult job, even for the work-hardened man John was. He was paid only 60 cents per ton mined, but managed to save $100 by 1880. It was quite a large amount of money for anyone at the time, let alone a former slave. The money was the initial capital that John Benson used to buy land along Kalijah Creek. Good crops and the favorable price of cotton allowed John to grow his wealth. Finally, after a decade of hard work, he had enough money to buy 160 acres of his former master James Benson's land, the land that was part of the very same plantation where he used to work as a slave. John was anything but an idle man. He worked day and night on his cotton farm. Unlike the old times when he worked for food and shelter, now his hard work paid off. By 1898, John Benson accumulated substantial wealth. He had over 3,000 acres of land, a brickyard, a sawmill, a grist mill, and a cotton gin, with a compressing mill. Along with 40 other families, both black and white, he planted corn, cotton, and sugarcane. 1,000 acres of his land, covered with pine, oak, and hickory, provided abundant resources for the sawmill. Once an enslaved man, John Benson was now a wealthy landowner. His most significant wealth, however, was the community of farmers he created. Each of them had a job and a house of his own. There was even a tiny cabin schoolhouse where kids were provided basic education. It was something most black people in the South could only dream of. The community John Benson created was just an indication of what Kalijah was about to become. John's son, William Benson, inherited his father's vision of creating a prosperous black community and took it to a higher level.
I'm gonna leave this here, just for the sake of time for my videos, but I highly recommend watching his story, William Benson. Please click the link in the description. I will leave it.
In 1916, the Alabama Power Company obtained the right to build a dam on the Tallapoosa River and sealed the destiny of the Kalijah community. When 10 years later, the water began to fill the creek and form Lake Martin, Kalijah Industrial and Academic Institute closed its doors. The community of thriving black people ceased to exist.
Here's Vanport.
The city of Vanport was built during World War II in North Portland, right where Delta Park is today. At the time, it was the second largest city in Oregon and the largest federal housing project in the country, home to more than 40,000 people. About 40% of the population was black. Most people worked in the Kaiser shipyards for the war effort, but a lot of them left town when the war ended. By 1948, the population had essentially been cut in half, and that is when disaster struck. On Memorial Day, the Columbia River breached the railroad levee, spilling into Vanport and destroying the city. At least 17 people died.
It was the worst weather disaster in the United States in 1948, and so it had national and international news. President Truman came and he said we should rebuild it. However, the city fathers at that time did not want it rebuilt. They wanted Vanport essentially gone and erased, which is part of the reason that so few people know about Vanport today.
But the city left a legacy behind, helping integrate Portland and Oregon, a state that not long before had very few black people due to its black exclusion laws.
These were strangers, 40,000 strangers who created a community. And when that community was disrupted, they brought that community feeling right into Portland and changed it from extremely conservative to what we have now.
And I'll leave a link in the description. I believe that what is coming, they intend to do these things. And I think this is evidence that when it does happen, these communities that are forgotten, this is what they normally do for a time when they're going to do it again in order to make a big issue out of it for themselves. Because they do this all the time. They don't do it. This whole submergence ritual was not practiced for the big event. This is just what they do. And with that, I will explain more things about this continent that I only recently found out about as being possible, because there are three cities all submerged by the construction of a dam: Oscarville, Coalinga, and Vanport, Oregon. These acts were obviously deliberate and heinous.